Hello, my name is Kevin Rourke and today I'm going to be reviewing Hunter the Reckoning. Now I can't find the core book for it at the moment because as often happens, so for some reason with that book, you know the way you've got some books that just seem to have legs and they just move around the place and you don't know where the hell they've gone. Maybe other people are looking at it, but I can't find it anyway. I've made fun of it for quite a while, but it is probably one of my favourite World of Darkness games. You know the games for me, but if it's an old World of Darkness game. I was surprised when I started looking up other people talk about them. Of late I've just come across a lot of videos on YouTube, people talking about that they prefer Hunter the Vigil. In fact, not that's perfectly fine, but that quite a lot of people actually don't seem to like Hunter the Reckoning, which I found particularly odd because I really do like it. I think it's actually a great game. It's got some aspects of it, it's like, okay, fine, but there's some other bits of it that work out really well. I ran a game of it years ago and I'd love to run it again or play in it again at some point. It has a very different take than Hunter the Vigil. I know a bit about Hunter the Vigil. I haven't played. There's going to be comparisons there, being that that's New World Darkness, the old World Darkness. And to be honest with you, I think Hunter the Vigil is a perfectly good game. I prefer the sounds of Hunter the Reckoning. Obviously I played it first, so I'm biased there. But it's a completely different approach to Hunters in World of Darkness. So I'll talk about it a bit later, but I know Wintersome, I'll leave a link to. He has a very in-depth review of Hunter the Vigil, breaking up into multiple parts, and he's got he goes into a lot of details about it. It actually does sound like a very interesting game, but I have to say my preference is still going to be about Hunter the Reckoning. But if you want to find out about Hunter the Vigil, if you're looking up Hunter the Reckoning, Hunter the Vigil is a very similar game. There's obviously some other ones, but you know, as a World of Darkness one, even if you wanted to, even if you prefer the sound of Hunter the Reckoning, you could obviously shoehorn that into Old World of Darkness. Or if you prefer the sound of Hunter the Reckoning and want to put that into it, even alongside, you could have it as, there's no reason they have to be exclusive to each other, like background wise. But anyway, Hunter the Reckoning anyway it's got to be up there as one of my favourite games. I can understand why some people would put off with certain aspects, but overall, taken as a whole, I really do like it. What happens in Hunter the Reckoning is that at certain moments when they're about to be confronted by supernatural things, some people are given some kind of warning. Perhaps they're listening to radio and all of a sudden they just hear the word danger, or they see a road sign has changed, dead or something like that. It's like some kind of a warning, something kind of like with something's not right. You just haven't started paying attention, and then when they're confronted by the supernatural thing, that they might develop these powers, might try and stop it in some way. And there's different types of Hunter, effectively, but there's several reasons why I love this. It's cool. It's got a big section on just going through like different little stories, how different people are doing things. And what I really love is the myriad different kinds of background I think we've been coming up with. There's different types of Hunter, as I mentioned. There's visionaries are supposed to be sort of, as a stereotype, kind of analytical about how they approach it and try to figure out how the undead work, how to understand their framework of how this particular type of supernatural creature works, their weaknesses, their strengths, different things. In one of the books, I don't think it's a core book, but I think it's might be in the player's guide or storyteller's guide. They have a visionary who's about 12 or 14. Actually, I think it's in Hunter the Inferno. Actually, when I think back on it, but he tricks a zombie and he traps it down into a well. He's just doing a logbook every day. He's figuring out when is it going to starve. You know, he's basically, it says he's healthy this day, and he lowers down a bucket of chicken, but it pays no attention to not like live chickens, but it's still paying attention to him. It's not eating this, and it's like he's trying to figure out how long will it take for a zombie to starve. Obviously, it doesn't want dead flesh, or it's living flesh after he puts a bucket down, so he's trying to figure it out. But not every hunter's going to take that approach. That's a visionary. And certainly not all visionaries are going to take the exact same approach. We'll go into details about how people work like this. You have Avengers, who are, by and large, some of the most offensive characters, that they will go on the offensive, that they will attack, as many hunters will, but they're angry, and it can often be particularly violent. But you've got judges as well, who try to figure out which monsters, they believe need to be killed, and which monsters, might be able to coexist with mankind. Now, there's different judges take different approaches, but you have innocents as well, who don't necessarily want to fight the supernatural. They don't want violence. They're almost passive in ways. They're the most difficult to explain in some ways correctly, because it's very easy to get innocents and Avengers wrong. I think they're easy to fall into stereotypes with. You have redeemers, but you have redeemers, and you have several other kind of archetypes that these people are, and this does affect your abilities to a degree, because each of these is a creed, and you have 3 different virtues, and each of the creeds is tied in with a different virtue, and that's your main. You go along with these. You can get abilities. You can get abilities that the other creeds have and the other virtues have, but your primary creed and your primary virtue must be the highest. You must go furthest in here. So, for example, I had a game where one of the players was a defender, and that player was able to get an Avenger ability. I think it's a smite or something like that. I don't know, name evades me now. But there's a lot of interesting abilities that the characters can get. These are supernatural abilities. You're imbued with something. They're known as the imbued, hunters, the blessed, the chosen. There's various different names, because there's no uniformity. Anyone could be chosen. It could be it could be a person in their 80s. It could be a person who is still a child, still an adolescent. They could be 6 years old. They could be chosen. They can be imbued with these powers. There's no defining thing to these people. There's nothing uniting aside from their abilities. And then some of the people they actually come from good things in the book, of different people talk about, oh, I think we're all this, and some guys saying we're all psychic. Some people saying, no, I think we've always been here. It's just now we're communicating on a thing called HunterNet, a website that is kind of hidden, but you're somehow guided to it if you're imbued. You're just you find it. It's hidden underneath another website, but you just seem to naturally find it. But some of the hunters are like, maybe we've always been here. It's just it seems to be so limited in number, and obviously we have to be secretive to hide from the supernatural so we can fight them. Then, until the advent of the internet becoming more common, we haven't been able to contact each other. But that's one of the things they cut down the book itself. It's like, well, somebody gets going, well, we've looked at this, but despite the fact we have hunters who are geriatric, we have hunters who are children, we have hunters who are the entire gamut of ages, we cannot find a hunter, regardless of their age, who was imbued before this particular point. Which ties in with stuff in the meta plot of the Great World of Darkness. And it's very odd just kind of seeing it like that. It's like, okay, that's that you can use that. Just kind of, then again, they did make it very clear in the book that you can make it your own. You can change things. Well, whoever posted that, they just might not have met the right person. They might not have met any of the people who were imbued before that point. But I like to take it as that, because it links into a whole meta plot. They explain to a degree, though they keep it fairly loose, because the game is a lot more personal in many ways. And the meta plot is there. There's a thing that's happening and rumbling in the background. You can ignore it for your game if you want, and you can change how things go about. So what you end up doing is, in character creation, it's similar to other things in a storyteller system. You've got your abilities and you've got your attributes, and you put your points, and you decide, well, are you going for mental, social, or physical stats the most, and then you go and do your skills, and you pick a group again once more, and you get points. You assign them in. So if you prioritize your mental stats, you get the most points put in there, where if you put your physical stats as lowest, you get the least points put in there, and you can assign them how you will. But you go through the stage. It's fairly similar. Once you open the book, it's fairly self-explanatory. You get to the point where you get freebie points where you can modify the character a bit. But it does say to you in the character creation section, you shouldn't go off and make Rambo. You're missing the point of the game. This is supposed to be normal people who are thrown into extraordinary situations. And that's the appeal there, because you have a great opportunity for fantastic role playing. Because when I ran a game, we had, I think, 5 characters, and 4 of them worked. One of them didn't, because that player tried to make Indiana Jones meets Rambo. I'll get to him in a bit. One of the players went off and made a professional wrestler. And the idea he had decided for this guy was that he was a professional wrestler and he was on the brink of, getting the attention of like the WWF, that kind of thing. But his character, when he made his character, he had 3 in brawl, so he had a very high brawl because different things. But he also had 3 in acting. I think he had equal or higher in acting. He might have actually had higher points in acting once he got into freebie points. And he was a defender, but it was fantastic. Yeah, no, if he's going to be a good professional actor, he can't just know these different moves and these different things. He has to be able to rile up the crowd. He has to be charismatic. So he actually had very good social stats in that regard and social skills. So that was really cool getting to see him doing that. Then we also had 2 of the guys obviously been watching a lot of Supernatural. So we had Sam and Dan. Sam, as opposed to Sam and Dean, but this was obviously they hadn't encountered any supernatural stuff before in their lives up to this point. Sam was a law student, and Sam was studying at the local university, and you could kind of see they both drew a lot of inspiration from the show, but he actually ended up, it was really fun because he ended up, his character, because he's tried to stat him as a law student, someone who'd be actually very good at being a law student, and he had very little combat skills at all. I think he had dodge because his brother Dan used to shoot him with paintball guns and just picking him when he was younger because he was the younger brother. So he actually accidentally ended up becoming a human lie detector in many ways, as well as he had ridiculously good stats for rolling initiative. Which you guys are like, what? He's like, yeah, he just picked like wits and dexterity, I think it was, or something like that. But then he had his brother Dan, and Dan was a mechanic working in the garage in the inner city. And he also decided that his character was a paintball fanatic, that he loved going paintballing. So he put points in Arsenal and discussed it with me. His character was really into paintball. He had no actual guns. The Arsenal background gives you so many guns, whatever, and additional paramilitary equipment. You know what, day guns turn off. He said, can I do this? And we discussed that. So his character had a load of paintball guns. He didn't find actual, real, proper lethal guns. But he had night vision goggles and ghillie suits and walkie-talkies. His character was over the top with his love of paintballing. So he actually had a few ranks in firearms, which most characters didn't, because this game was being set in Ireland. And your gun ownership is fairly rare. I know a few people who have guns, but they're farmers and or they're members of gun clubs. It's fairly restricted. So I'd set the game around, so the guys accepted us by and large. And I was like, okay, great. And they didn't go off getting guns and things as the game went on. They embraced that this one is set in Ireland, and they didn't want the attention of guns. And they kind of thought, like, these are supernatural creatures. How good or how useful are guns going to be? And do we need the extra attention of trying to get these on the black market, which is going to be difficult? Plus, who are we handing money over to if you're trying to get them into the black market? It would have gotten messy. And next we had, I think it was Craig was his name, was the name of the 4th character. And this character had been a chemistry student at the university. So himself and Samuel had seen each other in university at one stage, didn't really know each other very well, so the only passing, aside from obviously Sam and Dan, knew each other because they're brothers. There's passing knowledge there, whereas Dan was a huge fan of the first character, the Defender, whose stage name was Nightwolf. So he was like, oh my god, it's when they actually eventually, when the story began, they made sure, he was like, oh my god, I used to wear a mask and stuff, so people didn't know what he looked like, even though he was a huge guy, so he stood out a bit. But his character had been a chemistry student. Craig had been a chemistry student. But he had dropped out. His character was supposed to have had huge potential, but he had wasted it. He had not. He just hadn't applied himself, and he'd gotten lazy, and he had dropped out of college, and he had started growing. He started growing drugs, and that's what his character was doing for a living. And his character was slightly deranged, but his character had an insanely high stamina and resistance to drugs. Just his metabolism just could process stuff and throw it out, so it barely had any. He had to take ridiculous quantities of anything for it to take any effect. And that was kind of the role he was going for. So like, okay, that's cool, that's interesting. So everyone's character's doing different, and one of the players kind of came in very late into character creation, even though it was on. And I was like, okay, they came in, it's like, oh, they did their character up. It's like, oh, my character's an archaeologist. Like, okay, that's cool. And I started looking through the character sheet, and I'm like, okay, I'm gonna need you to justify some of this stuff. Like, I'd been very clear, and I'd said to this guy, you know, I point out this as in the book, you shouldn't make a Rambo character. And he went off, and he had very high firearms. He liked firearms 3. He had a melee of 4, and I'm like, sweet God, you got a melee of 4. And I was like, how does your character have a melee of 4? And he's like, oh, my character does reenactment. I'm like, 4 is an awful lot, especially in reenactment when you're pulling your blows. He's like, oh no, and he insisted that no, my character was like, okay, you know, that's actually ridiculously high, because, you know, 4, you could compete in the Olympics. You're not going to win. You'd be lucky to get bronze, but you could represent your country. You're really high here. And I started looking through his background. He had arsenal. I was like, okay, you've got guns, fine, I have no problem with that. But how does your character have guns? He says, my character's part of the IRA. I'm like, what? He's like, yeah, my character's part of the IRA. I was like, well, you know what, the game's encouraged you to be from whatever walk of life or whatever. So I was like, okay, your character is a member of the IRA. Alright. We'll get back to that later. So I was like, alright, so he has these, and he's like, and I just kind of sat down and was like, you know, you know, and the players were all kind of looking at him going like, what are you doing? And I just said, I was kind of encouraging him not to play this character as the remainder of players, but he wanted to stick with it. I said, okay, but we're just looking at this. This is, you know, this is Rambo meets Zorro meets Indiana Jones. This is not an everyday man. I don't mind certain aspects of this, you know, the aspects individually aren't that bad, although the melee 4 was particularly like, wow, like, the arsenal was like, I was a bit taken aback with the whole that his character was a member of the IRA, and that's why he had a bunch of illegal guns. I was like, oh, okay, fair enough. But he only came into the game in the second session, because he didn't bother showing up for the first session, which was annoying. It was very annoying, actually. I know this game is turning. This is I'm getting way off I get way off the review here. This kind of shows you kind of the fun stuff you can have at the game. But the players initially were all imbued at the same time. They had seen these zombies attacking a woman. This led into their first adventure, and they were all imbued in different ways. He had some cool bits where Dan picked up like a dustbin lid, and he ended up using the Avenger ability. I think it's Smite or something, or I can't remember it later. But he brings it down on the thing's head. Howard rolls a botch. It's like, okay, you decapitated the head, but you're after breaking your finger. So in the very first fight, he broke his fingers because he got like a botch a tree or something like that. But the interactions with the characters are very cool. They started going on, this mystery, trying to find out what was going on, why this woman was being attacked. She didn't know she was involved. There was this case where a lot of people seem to be randomly getting attacked, but a lot of them seem to be women who, when they investigated, had been domestically abused. Not all of them, but one of the players figured out, I think there's actually something different going on here. You know, a lot of these, and he's like, okay, let's discard anyone that don't have anything to do with domestic violence, and try to figure out a link, a side up between them. They had all gone to this one women's haven. And he goes, okay, grand. And he goes off, and this is the judge, this is Sam. And he'd gone off investigating, trying to figure out what the hell was going on. During this adventure, they encountered a few odd things. One of the, I'll get back to what he did when he started figuring out stuff. They had figured out that someone they were curious about, someone they thought was a bit off, used to often hang out at this nightclub. Didn't know what they looked like, but they'd been told, you know, this person was around at this stage when something happens. Like, okay, grand. And they went into a bar. And they went into the bar, and hunters have a few abilities. One of them is where you spend a conviction point, which I'll talk about later. Your points go up and down, depending on what you do, different things, and how well you do. And you can gamble them or risk them. It's actually quite a cool mechanic. But you know, the guys weren't using that term much because that lets you see any supernatural thing that's pretty much in the area. But they will spot you back. They will know they've been noticed. And the cool thing is about hunters, the supernatural creatures don't know what a hunter is. They don't know abuse. Now, some people have fought hunters before. They've fought witch hunters and different things. Not with the powers that these guys have. So it's like, what the hell? And so they start looking around. We're like, what the hell is it? You know, but rather than use this ability, they tell Samuel the judge he had an ability where he could look around the room, and he might notice that person hasn't blinked in a while, or this person isn't breathing, or there's something off about them. The description going, depending on what they are, the GMs make up a description, just something off. It doesn't tell you what they are, but it lets you know, no, there's something unusual about them, something stands out about them. He did it, and for the first time he didn't notice something. And they were specifically gone into the bar to find out about these things. But when he said he couldn't see anything out of place, three of the other characters, all the other characters walked off. They decided that they would, they tried to basically picking up women. It's like, what are women in the bar? It's like, okay, here's a bunch of pictures of women in the bar. And they're trying to pick up women. It's like, okay, fair enough. And they roll. I said, okay, yeah, no, we'll do a bit of role play and also give me some chat rolls. And one of the guys does ridiculously well. Dan does ridiculously well. So it's like, oh no, I get ridiculous, you know, success. And I'm like, okay, fine. You pick up this woman, and there's another woman showing it as well. It's like, I'm gonna try and make another roll, try and get him to both go out me. And I'm like, okay, fine. You're supposed to be here finding supernatural things, but you're an everyday man. Apparently, you're being led by your parents, not by your brain right now. When you're fighting supernatural things, you know, I'm not gonna. It's like, fair enough, you can do that. And when the other guys basically picked, I showed a bunch of pictures of women in the bar, and Nightwolf, the professional wrestler, goes, I'm gonna go over and talk to her. And he starts chatting her up, and she, you know, seems very receptive, and she suggests to go out the back, maybe so she can smoke a cigarette or whatever, and, you know, kind of be with Jessica. So he's like, yeah, I'll go out the back with her. And I'm actually sitting there going, he's just after picking up the vampire when he's trying to pick up a woman. He's after picking up a goddamn vampire. Meanwhile, Craig goes over to a woman and he's like trying to chat up. I think he rolled no successes or got a botch of one. And she's like, okay. He's like, you know, he's like, hey, how are you? And she's like, oh, would you like to, you know, do you want to buy me a drink? And she buys him a drink and she says, thanks, and walks off. So he just slumps back to Sam. And they're the two of like, yeah, Sam's kind of like, what are you doing? What are they doing? Why has everyone just gone away? And Craig's like, yeah, everything's stupid. Just kind of like, yeah, I've utterly failed. I'm gonna go back to hunting monsters now. But in the alleyway, this vampire tried to bite Nightwolf. But she tried to use an ability on him, but it failed. he resisted, and I can't remember exactly what it was, but for a second you had an odd thing where the vampire was looking at him going, what the hell are you? And he was looking at the vampire going, what the hell are you? And then her buddies came out into the alleyway. There was 3 of them. Now, to put this into terms, this particular coterie of vampires, using the masquerade terms, there was a small number of them, and these guys were all extremely high generation. They were barely deserving of the name vampire kindred, but they were still a significant threat. It was really funny when I think Sam. There's a couple of really funny things in that fight, because both sides effectively ended up going, screw this, I don't know what the hell these things are, and running away. Nobody was killed on either side, didn't know what the hell was going on. Like, these were really young vampires, it's like, no, I'm going to figure out what the hell's going on. That's it. So in the course of this investigation, you'd already come across zombies, and, well, didn't know what these things were, but they're vampires. So, this actually all makes sense in the end. And I tried to, just get them used to that there were multiple different things out there. And Sam looks directly in her eyes, and he was everything's called held my gaze or something like that, where he used to make a test and he can stop a creature from moving. However, this made eye contact. But she actually had dominate. And he hadn't. You can resist mental compulsions and things. If you you're immune to them if you have spent a point of conviction. So for the rest of the scene, you're immune to them. But he hadn't. But he was making eye contact, and she used dominate, run. So he just had to run away. One of the other symbols was a caitiff, a clanless. And I think he had like a point in celerity, so he managed to pick up Craig and throw him against the wall. But remember, I say Craig is ridiculously tough. Craig somehow soaked that damage. Maybe it should have been lethal, but this guy wasn't ridiculously strong. Maybe actually throwing against the wall should be lethal and he shouldn't be able to use his stamina. But at that particular time, I was still trying to figure out the combat. It was our first, it was our second combat, so a bit more significant. So threw against the wall, and basically both sides just kind of backed off from each other. And remember, they're without Dan. So after this, Sam was trying to ring Dan, but Dan's like, Dan is in the taxi going back home with 2 ladies. He's not answering the phone. He's like, no. I think he turned off the phone a little, and Sam was fuming. So there's a fight going to be on about that later. But Sam eventually figured out, wait, there's 2 things here going. There might be 2 separate things going on with these attacks of attacking people. So he goes to this women's haven where all of these women have been at one point, and he saw someone who he recognized. It was a woman, another student from his course, and he used his ability to detect, if there's someone who uses judge ability. He saw that there was something off about her, something more primal, something he just couldn't quite put a finger on. And he asked to talk to her in private. And he said, I know you're not human. And it's been years, so unfortunately I won't even be able to paraphrase it well. But he had a great talk with this character. He said, I know what you've done. And she said, look, I'm only going after guys who have been abusing their wives. Now, yes, I've been killing them, but she's been going after the greatest scum ever. And he said he understood, but he's like, you can't keep killing them, otherwise I will have to come after you, and I don't want to do that. We're 2 intelligent law students, we can get them in other ways. It doesn't have to be like this. He actually managed to do well enough through role playing and through actual roles that he convinced her that they should go about this another way and not kill him. And that was him actually after, because his character was designed to be a good lawyer. He was designed to be convincing. He was not good in combat, but socially he was fantastic, and the player was really on his game that session. He managed to talk from putting Werewolf of the Apocalypse terms, he managed to talk a Black Fury into he changed her mind on how she take the approach. He wasn't saying they shouldn't do anything, they should do nothing, But that was actually very cool, and she was a source of some information to them later on, although they weren't completely allied. She was a source of information to them to a degree. But this is some of the fantastic stuff that they started doing. Unfortunately, the Rambo character, who I can't remember the name of, who was only there for one session, the second session, he came in, his character was bizarre. He just went off doing really bizarre thing. He had decided he wanted to be a martyr. This is one of the other types where you can do a lot of things where you sacrifice stuff and allies are the enemy, allies are healed or the enemies take damage, and you know, while you suffer for all this stuff, but you can do some great stuff. Obviously, he just liked the abilities. Because in his imbuing, which is separate from everybody else's, there was some guy there, and he decided, oh, you know, it's like, I'll go off, and he was talking about picking up the bystander, the innocent person who was there, who he didn't particularly like, but he was talking about picking them up and using them as a human shield. Because his character is physically, that's not right. And we're just like, you had me and all the players were looking like, seriously, you're going for martyr, and you want to use someone else's human shield. I mean, this is it for Wayward, maybe, because he was fighting something pretty nasty. But when he saw all of us looking, I'm like, are you serious? He quickly decided that wouldn't be the best course of action. I was quickly getting sick of this crap. But in character, the imbuing had been seen by one of the other characters who already was in the game. So he went over to wonder what the hell was going on. And he kind of joined in their adventure for a while. But remember I said he was in the IRA? Like his character was in the IRA, not the guy himself, his character was in the IRA. This is just bizarre levels of, I mean, his character just met these people, and it's like, you know, seriously, you don't think people are gonna find it odd? When he basically was using English like an insult, and it's like, oh, if anyone disagrees, oh, what are you, English or something? It's like, we're just sitting there going like, what? I mean, I don't mind if your character's gonna have unorthodox views or something in a game, but it was bizarre. It was utterly bizarre. Like, we're all just sitting there going like, what the hell is this? And his character is immediately convinced we have our ability, these abilities we have from God. We're holy warriors, and it's like, and it was just, you had to be there. You had to be there. It was like, what are you? Okay, if you had taken one or two individual parts of what he was going for, it would have worked. Like any small part would have worked, except for he had all this stuff. It was too much. It was over the top. It was unbelievable. It was so silly. And then we started talking about when they were asking questions or something. His character was carrying a pistol. Like I said, we don't have gun licenses in Ireland. He's firing on a handgun. I've never seen a handgun that wasn't carried by, like, even our police don't, the majority of the police don't carry around guns. We have armed units and things like that. I have seen some police who have handguns. This is for like, you know, the armed units, things like that. And I have seen military personnel with handguns. But this is a regular guy walking around with a handgun. He has it, and and some guy was asking, you know, he was asking unusual questions. He's like, oh, are you sure you want a question? And he flashes him the gun, and you've only other players like, what are you doing? And this guy was not neutral role-playing. He was not neutral role-playing. We were just like, what are you doing? What are you doing? This is okay. You're scared the crap out of this guy because you're blatantly threatening, just flashing him your handgun. But when I started asking him stuff like that, it's like, oh, okay, well, you've got your guns from being the IRA. He's like, oh, no, I don't have guns from being the IRA. I have a gun license. I have gun license. I'll have these legal. My character's not a member of the IRA. I'm like, what? He's like, yeah, no, I was joking. My character's not a member of the IRA. Even though like all the crap with his character going on with English people, he would have made most extreme IRA man of the year by the fact that he just met these people and he was going on about the English. I was like, no. And the problem is he kept jumping back and forth saying, no, when I said I had these guns league and I wasn't a member of the IRA, I was joking. It's like he was trying to have the best of both worlds. He wanted to have the connections of being in the IRA without any legal ramifications if he got found out. And it's just kind of like, I wouldn't have minded if he made a very clear incarceration. You wanted to legally have the guns. We remember the IRA. It's like if you're a member of any kind of a legal organization, if you have a gun legally, you're not using it in your illegal activities because they might be able to trace where those bullets came from, and you legally own this gun. So just like if you dropped the gun at some kind of crime scene or something, it was bizarre. It was bizarre. And he actually, like at the end of the adventure, like the guys were driving back, dropping people home. They were dropping him off first and held him to where they lived. And he's like, oh, I'll give you my number. And he's like, oh yeah, you give it a number. And one of the players turned around to me immediately. He's like, when your man wasn't paying attention, he's like, yeah, you remember I said I gave him my number? Like he was giving them their numbers. He's like, oh, can I have your number? And he asked one of the guys. And the guy said, yeah, I'll give you my number. And handed him the number. And when your man started talking to one of the other players, he turned around and he said, I'm not giving his character my number. He's crazy. He is crazy. I'm having not to. And this is actually fantastic because there are hunters disagree. They're not unified. There's no organization. There's no big organization. There's no structure. Even the creeds are loose. They're difficult to define in any way because you have people of different. You can have people of one creed, like we have with our defender. Nightwolf was able to pick up an ability that was an Avenger ability. So it's very difficult to decide who's where and what. And it's like, but as the game went on, we carried on. Just talk about the first adventure. The players were able to figure out that these vampires had figured out that somebody had killed one of their ghouls. And they're trying, who the hell's killed one of those? It wasn't a natural thing, it was a supernatural thing. So they wanted to figure out, I'm paraphrasing because they were using these terms, they didn't know enough to know half of that stuff, but they'd figured out the base of somebody killed the vampire's ghoul, one of their minions. And this is, well, surprisingly, one of the people that the Black Fury had killed. So, and they're like, okay, how are we gonna, they're trying to figure out how are we gonna deal with this, and that effectively to try and flush out whoever did this. They were, well, it wasn't really sort of flush out whoever did this. They were trying to ramp up the heat so the police would start investigating even more, and the police go after them. While at the same time, the vampires themselves had hired someone themselves to investigate on the supernatural side. So they're going to bring heat from both directions. So they had the coterie of young vampires basically killing off a few people in a similar fashion. I believe one of them had protein so he could make claws, so he could slash the people apart in a similar enough fashion. And the young coterie guys just killing random people. And then at the same time they had hired a Samedi. That's where the zombies had come from. This Samedi was a bounty hunter, effectively. He was a troubleshooter, and he had figured out that he had figured out the connection with this particular haven, and a lot of us do with a particular case, a court case that was going through. So he attacked one of the witnesses, one of the women who went to this haven, and he was using the zombies to do it. He was basically standing back on top of the building while he was sending in the zombies to attack. And he had a camera and he was recording this. And he saw the players, the hunters, arriving. So he thought, these must be, and he saw them doing things that humans shouldn't be able to do. So he's like, I don't know what these are, but these are things now. How am I going to do this? He sent them he sent to one of their houses, I believe, actually, a videotape saying, I know who you are. He's going to start messing with them, try to see their reactions, gauge better what they were. So he sent off the videotape, and the guy saw there's like, someone out there has videotape of us fighting zombies, but nobody's going to believe it's zombies. We're cutting off a guy's head with a dustbin lid, for God's sakes. We're in so much trouble. Like, what do we do? Because you're hunters, you don't get to go off and you don't have any backing. That's one of the things I think that's a big difference is Hunter the Vigil, you're a member of a secret organization. You could be a member of the Men in Black or something akin to the Order of Leopold, where you work for the Vatican and different things, where you've got this organization backing you to become these things. You don't have that. You're a member of this informal organization of just people you know, and the guys just had to work with who they knew and who they could trust, because they had already met through fantastic one PCs, because there are hunters like that. It's just how crazy it was. Like, he was not a martyr, he was a wayward, he was bizarre. His character was just utterly bizarre. But there are hunters you're going to disagree with, because there are people, but they're like, we're dealing with such high stakes. They're like, how are we going to deal with this? But that's the thing, you're by yourself. That's what I think makes Hunter Reckoning work so fantastically well, because you have the lack of eloquence. You're out there alone. You're after figuring out these supernatural things there. The only people you can rely on are the other people in your group who you've just been thrown together with. They can be a completely different line of life. They can, you know, it doesn't matter social class, doesn't matter what job you have, what career, where you're born, what ethnicity you are, what culture, what religion. It doesn't matter. You're thrown from all different angles, and you just have to work with it from there. And I think that's very cool, because you have a lot of interesting RP discussion of what you should do, because there's no elder sitting there going, oh, you should do it like this is the way it has always been, because it's new, it's a blank page, you are writing how things are done now. There's no restrictions there, there's no one telling you you shouldn't do this, you shouldn't do that. However, there are consequences for how you do things. If obviously you go around just killing loads of people, setting fires to kill a vampire that can burn out entire buildings, you're going to draw attention. You're going to draw a lot of attention. But it depends how far you want to go. But the player's like, so many roles and stuff. However, Craig had decided his character was really bored before he left the house, so he said, I'm going to have made some homemade explosives. I'm going to do it using this material, and his character is a chemistry student and a goddamn idiot savant, effectively, where he knew his stuff really well for his stuff. Socially, his character was a bit inept in certain ways. He was grounded in other ways, but I was like, okay. So he goes off and he makes all these explosives. And he's like, I'm going to rig up the door in case somebody comes through, unless they do this particular thing, that'll go off. And I'm like, okay, give me a roll. Boom, he does a great roll. I was like, okay, fine. And cut back later on while they're out investigating to our somebody. The somebody decides he's going to, he's using his connection things. He's figured out who these people in the video are. It's been a few nights, but he figured out who these people in the video are. I think it was a few nights out, but I made some rolls. He figured out who these people were. So he finds out where some live, and through his underworld connections, he figured out where Craig lived. So he's going to pay a visit to Craig's house first, and he was going to do some snooping around there. He's still the people watching their reactions and stuff. He was basically going, I'll see how they react to this later on. I've got a few cameras and stuff set up in different places. I'm going to sneak in, put a camera in his home, I'm going to do a few things. And it's like, okay, I'm basically doing like, oh, he's going to have to do a larceny roll to pick the lock and stuff. It's like, you know, Craigman made a good bomb, but he not guaranteed it'll go off, especially because his character has no training in how to actually set these things up in a stealthy way. And this guy's pretty careful and cautious about things, and he sends in the zombies first. Except he rolled a botch, so he decided to go through him first self. Or he sent through the zombie, but he was still too close. And he got blown up. And Craig had made spare explosives and left him too close, and does blow up. So that was my boss villain for the first big adventure, or possibly a recurring villain, gone. But that's not what the players picked up out of it. Oh no. After doing some investigations at night, they were dropping Craig home, and they drove by his house and they looked up like the apartment building, and I saw the top of the apartment building where his apartment was on fire. There's a fire brigade all around, and they had just watched this video that said, like, not only do they know our faces, They know where we live. They're sending us a message. The guy who knew who they were was dead. He hadn't told any of the vampires. He was dead. He was gone. I'm like... And the player's like, they know where we live. We're screwed. We're utterly screwed. But in the end, they thought it was the other vampires they had met who had basically attacked them. Or who had the video and things. So they're like, oh, they used intermediaries to set up a meeting with them. And they met up in the house. They rigged up this house like hell for what they're doing. And they got the vampires come and was like, okay, why did you attack those people? And the vampires like, oh, we're gonna win, you know. They had obviously brought a few toys themselves, but they're like, oh, because they attacked one of ours. I want to find out what it was that was attacking. Turns out it was you. But you know, now they tend to simulate what these guys are running. I was like, okay. And it's like, you know, they're basically saying, they're going, there's 3 of us. You can only use this little trick on one of us. And he was the only one who, as far as they could tell, immediately at that stage in the first encounter, hadn't done any damage to them. You know, so he was the only one who stopped. And they could effectively try and use Dominate on him again. So they're like, yeah, we've got this guy sussed out now. We're going on a plan. He was held in the gaze. It can work on a group. Yeah. Yeah, so he was held in my gaze running in the house. And they decided symbolically to do it in the house where one of the people had been killed. One of the people they killed was. And it was an abandoned house out on its own. And he's held in my gaze. And they'd set this up, they'd figure out where they were going to be or whatever. And he started walking backwards. While still maintaining eye contact, he was walking backwards out the building. They had set up explosives throughout the house. They blew up the building, which of course is going to attract attention, but they blew up the building. And they've been careful about where they're sourcing material and Craig, they're able to figure out different things. So like, yeah, they took out those vampires. Like, yeah, you've actually done fantastically for the first adventure. Like, this came over multiple sessions, but this is the kind of thing. Initially, I wanted to see different supernatural things. The majority of the adventures that group had were against ghosts. But we had some other stuff. Thankfully, they never fought a werewolf. They could have in that first adventure. They still could have screwed up later on because they pissed off werewolf enough. Their friends didn't kill them. One of their biggest sources of information later on was they were seen as a curiosity by like the 2 werewolves they knew, because this woman Patricia Benner, the Black Fury, introduced them to a bone gnawer Metis, who he would give them what little information he knew on other supernatural things. To a degree, he would sell this information for them bringing him on shopping trips, and they would go to a supermarket and they would, you know, they would get loads of food, and then he would go off and give the food to some of his homeless friends and things. And it was like he was actually he was a bone gnawing Methodist Ahroon, I think. Actually, he was a scary guy, and I made it pretty clear, like he wasn't afraid of the guys at all. And the guys were kind of like, yeah, we're not messing with him. But I think that's one of the strengths. You can have anything in there. And I told the players at the start, like, yeah, I'm using World of Darkness, but there's no guarantee I'm sticking with it. You could see a vampire walk around in daylight, not sparkling, mind, not sparkling. This is years before that stuff even started. But you could go and you can do such interesting stories, and the character development was fantastic, because by the time we did the last session, there's a bit in when you're doing XP for the Storage Tower system where you say, you basically say, what did you learn this session, the learning curve? And some of the guys said different things, but for the last session, one of the players turned around and he talks about, because they'd fought a mage for the first time. It's the low level mage, I get it, but this was, they didn't beat him by going off and punching him to death, because although they did punch him a couple of times, they did damage, but this guy was smart, this guy escaped. But they basically used their brains, and they used a bit of intuition and a little luck. They basically, kind of like how Doctor Who takes guys down, they used their own tricks against him. They used stuff he'd set up. He had captured some kind of electricity elemental, and they freed it, and it went after him. So basically they used that to get at him. They were fighting him, but one of them actually managed to free us. Like, he escaped what the electricity element was able to chase after him. I was playing fast elusive stuff because I didn't have the mage book. So he was like, obviously, remember the technocracy, he had like robot kind of things. He like, that's was one of the weird things, they were fighting robots. Like, what the hell, we're fighting robots? And at the end of the story, one of the characters, like, you know, when he punched the old man and he was bleeding, and just figured, I was like, you know, this makes you, this isn't, they never fought a countermeasures before. They're like, this is an old man. And when you don't know, this isn't some kind of undead creature. This isn't some kind of, this is nothing like we fought before. This seems to be human, to have some odd abilities, but we've got odd abilities. And he's like, what right have we to judge? And one of the other, you know, it's like, this is another human. What right have we to judge him? We're not defending humanity. We're being judge, jury, and executioner here. And the judge, Samuel, which is great because they start off in basically opposed positions, and by the end of the campaign they changed positions, like at this particular moment. And Samuel said, we have to right because he was wrong. It is plain in his actions. You know, and I think he basically sense which I have judged you, whatever, and we tried to attack him. It's like he saw it, it's like, no, by his actions he deserves what he got. I'm not going to dress it up in any way. So, and then Dan, when we got to the learning curve, when we asked the player, like, what did Dan learn this session? And he just looks at me for a long time and he goes, I'm not sure if we're the good guys anymore. And that was fantastic. It's like, okay, yeah, you're having doubts about, you know, how you're going about this. That's fantastic. And it was very cool to see just the change. And the character development, because you're starting off as ordinary people, and how your interactions with the supernatural world change you. They have some cool stuff where they talk in the hunter backgrounds and stuff, where they talk about how some people develop, because it's a tough life. There's basically, eventually you're going to get to the stage where you're either going to die, or you're going to live long enough where you'll realize you're just putting your family in danger, and that you can't live the double life. And that's a very big thing. You can't live a double life. But you don't, on the one side you're missing out on politics. If you want to bring in your politics game, Hunter the Vigil seems like a much better game for that. But I like the idea of your characters are alone. They do not have backup. You might be able to roleplay and get some backup, like the guys who are going to get a little bit of backup from Door to Werewolves in him. But that was mostly in the form of small bits of advice of what the werewolves knew. They weren't giving up anything on werewolves. They were not. They found the guys a bit of a curiosity, but they said, we can work with them to a degree. And they seem to be really in over their heads. They did really well in some of the social interactions with them. But you're looking at it coming from two different positions, really. And I like that idea of you're in over your heads. The abilities you get from you, the supernatural abilities you can get, and they start getting really funky. Like one of the Avenger ones you can get is that you can basically have this cloud around you that makes you invisible supernaturally. Actually, one of the cool things is a lot of the abilities only really work against supernatural creatures, or very limited effect against normal people. Oh, it's Cleave. Yeah, that's it. Cleave is the name of the damn Avenger ability, where you can basically pick up a weapon and it will do damage to something. If it's basically a creature that goes, I don't take damage except from weapons made out of silver, or other weapons don't hurt me. It's like, yeah, but this is Cleave. I'm using Cleave on this, so this will work. And you can use that with weapons. You could pick up a chair. You could actually, you know, you could do all sorts of interesting things like that. And with Cleave, it's fantastic from a story point of view, because we can have some great kind of almost ridiculous moments where I think Nightwolf picked up a steel chair wrestling style, but he was cleaved on, so he just went BAM! And people went down. And you had some cool parts to that, but with this ability, and a lot of the abilities don't have any effect on normal people. You don't have that much edge on normal people. So if you're fighting a vampire, you've got some abilities that mean you have a chance. You need to work as a group. You need to work as a group. It's not going to work out if you don't work as a group. You need to coordinate. And use your abilities together, wherever they are, because they're too broad. They're too broad for me to really talk about. But if you're fighting against a ghoul, I think they'll work, because ghoul is a supernatural creature to a degree. However, if it's just some human troll the vampire has, some guy they're paying off, even if they know they're supernatural creatures, like, they could just be getting money, they could be paid off in favours and different things if they're fighting. One of them, your abilities as a hunter do very little, you know, and that's what you're really weak is other humans in certain respects, you know, if you're caught, like, and I love some of the advice they give in some of the book for the GM, like, it does, for the storyteller, it does kind of go on about, yeah, in the world of darkness, police are incompetent because it's just easier for them to get by. They don't investigate stuff. If you give them a damn good reason, they won't be incompetent. They will suddenly start working. They're incompetent by what was it? Oh, I can't remember exactly how they phrase it. It's been years since I read that bit. But a lot of the book is given over to story to get you into the feel of this different thing. You have your abilities. You have your archetypes, which makes you come for your abilities, and it kind of reflects your personality. But it just works out really well because the character is something unique, something you bring in. I've described the characters there with it. I was going to be in another game, unfortunately it didn't really take off. My guy was going to be a forest ranger. And I had farms at like 2 or 3, but I had much higher like survival and things like that. I think it might have been it might have been 3, but that was like my one compass, because I used a rifle, because yeah, if Bear gets up close, I'm screwed. This game was like set in America. It's like I'm gonna shoot him with the gun, and if he gets up close, I'm in trouble. Like, my guy was more of a range guy. And one of the other characters worked in McDonald's, and there's so many aspects you can bring in, and you have where the character was beforehand and how it affects him. It's fantastic for how the character can develop, because, put it bluntly, if you're playing Vampire the Masquerade, when you're a vampire, there's no going back. You can't walk around in daylight, you need blood to survive and things. Hunter, there's the illusion, there's the thought that maybe I can go back, or maybe I can hold on, because you haven't left, I can hold on to what I have. It's extremely difficult. You're probably going to lose them, and it's depressing. The game isn't, you know, you can try, you can basically think, oh, my character, you know, you can think in character, maybe I can get myself out of this, or there's always going to be another monster. Even if you stop hunting, even if you turn your back on it, they actually have a built-in that your character their life will lose a bit of meaning without the hunt. It is now hardwired into them. They will become depressed. The conviction points are fantastic for this. You can spend conviction points to activate certain abilities. Not all abilities require it. Some require willpower, some require different things, or just on the activation. But you can spend conviction points to do certain abilities. As well as this, you can gamble with 3 conviction points to try and boost an ability, because you have conviction, you can push yourself further. It's great for that, and yeah, it's pretty cool. It works out. If you succeed at the GM's discretion, if he thought it was worthwhile what you're doing it for, you might get back those conviction points. You might get an additional conviction point. If you fail, you lose the conviction points. If you botch, you lose all the conviction points you have. And conviction, once you get conviction up high enough, once you get up to 10, it will reset to the default for your creed, which is usually going to be 3. In the case of Avengers, it's going to be 4. It will bring up a virtue, one of your virtues, and you got to keep your primary virtue the highest. But it's at the GM's discretion, because if he thinks you're just trying to cheese it, it's not going to work out. One of the players in that game I was running before, he went off, and his character, he started refusing to spend convictions. Like, I want to bring up my conviction. And one of the people who was bringing it, because you don't spend XP on this, it's all true in game. When you beat a monster, you can get some conviction, but you're spending conviction to different things. You know, a certain amount. The GM can give you conviction awarded at different points, because things are doing well in different respects. But you can only get your virtues up through conviction. You can only get a conviction up by basically beating the bad guys and gambling it at appropriate points that the GM feels appropriate. One of the players was gambling it often enough, but only at points that actually seemed appropriate. So he actually managed to get his virtue fast enough. One of the other players was like, I'm not spending my conviction at all. I'm not going to spend it. I'm going to hold on to it and I'm going to try and basically bring up my virtues like this because I'm not going to spend it. When other people are spending their points to know that thing's a supernatural creature and we're using conviction to use their second sight, he was refusing to because, well, he's already told me it's a supernatural creature. I don't need to turn mine on, even though it made him immune to dominate and other things. I'm like, okay, fair enough. Did not work out for him. He would have been better off spending them. He would have at least broken even and been doing cooler stuff. So I like conviction mechanic. The whole powers, you could strip them out if you wanted, because I know a lot of people aren't particularly keen on the, and you've got to figure out at this point, if you're not particularly keen on the idea of the something has imbued them, the heralds, the messengers, whatever you want to call them. And the thing is, they have very little communication with these things. They won't have a conversation with them. They do have, and I didn't do too much in that campaign, the heralds or the messengers, whatever you want to say, will set up symbols. The one-step symbols, they will occasionally send them warnings beyond when they're reviewed, but this is rare enough. As well as that, they have a cool thing in the book where hunters have a set of symbols, and the cover of some of the books, like, yeah, hunters have symbols. It's kind of hard to make them out there, but you see the black, and each of these in the book has different meanings. It's actually one of the cool things a visionary can get when they have very high points in their vision thing, is they can go off and go, I'm going to invent a new one. And other hunters will identify the meaning. Hunters will recognize the meaning of these symbols, but the cool thing of visionary, eventually could make a new one and have a symbol, but these symbols have you know, they have means, like, it can mean something as simple as one of them could mean monster, and another one could be protected, and they could like spray paint these or put them in different locations, and hunters know the meaning of them, but they're usually very short, very simple things. Like I said, hunter, or not, it's like protected or whatever. It's like, it doesn't clearly spell it out, but it gives you a bit of an indication. So you might need to think about these a bit and think about the context they're being put in. And if you're in a rush, just to make it clear, but the players in that game around didn't have huge interaction with other hunters. You also have HunterNet, as I spoke about before, and HunterNet is, it's cool. One of the players ended up had high computers. Craig had high computers, and I actually thought, wow, you've actually got such high computers and stuff, and your character's the only one who's actually registered in HunterNet. He was the only one who actually bothered going online to it. The other characters didn't in game. I went off and went, okay, they've got a section of like articles in the book, and I photocopied these out. And I took out the bits that were anything to do with mechanics or any different stuff. Like, these are articles, they're all on HunterNet. And I said, bam, here you go. When you're rolling other checks at other times, I can tell you, as well as the guys, anything they found otherwise. When it's anything to do with, like, you can read these in between sessions. And if you recall any of this stuff, it's stuff you read on HunterNet, because these are all HunterNet articles. So I was like, okay, that's pretty cool. But on he didn't go off and read them. So that was kind of, but he had the option, so obviously his character hadn't bothered reading them. Like, I gave them to him. He was like, you can go off and read these whenever you want. But hunters refer to vampires as rots and things, because when they look at them with the second sight, it looks like they're rotting and they're clearly undead creatures to them. Well, they look like they're rotting anyway, so they refer to them as rots. And you've got different things, and you've got a section at the back of the book where it talks about a little bit about werewolves and vampires and mages and spirits, and the spirits and zombies are going to be your bread and butter. Bad guys, they're really a lot more on the level that the vampires can handle, but if you want to throw in stuff from various other lines, you can. I was eyeing up many bad guys for that campaign from various other things, and just throw in curveballs. One of the things they have, of course, an inbuilt in, as if for all the old World of Darkness stuff, like what was going on, which is in the Book of Judgment, which I have, but I'll review that separately at a different time. I'm more or less talking about the game in general. Another cool thing that they have is they don't have all the hunter types in the main, because not all the hunters work terribly well, as in they're a bit more difficult to do with PCs. They have 3 down I think in the player's guide or storyteller's guide. There's Wayward, and Wayward are unhinged. If there is a vampire hiding out in an orphanage, they will burn down the orphanage to get the vampire. They're borderline unplayable. They pretty much are in most games. I remember a player when I was talking about starting up a new game, he's like, oh, I want to play Wayward, and I was like, okay, you're gonna have to get how big of a deal that's gonna be. I'm gonna have to be happy that I think you can pull it off, because it's a big deal. It's a big deal. Wayward are a huge deal. It does go off that some of the Wayward, some of them don't. They just have this, because being imbued changes you. That some of them don't. They recognize this is wrong, and they hate themselves for doing this stuff. They don't like doing it, but they can't resist it. It will overtake them. They will try and resist doing these horrible things, but eventually they will slip up and they will do these horrible monstrous acts that Wayward do. And a lot of Wayward know they have a bad reputation, so they pretend to be Avengers. Because the line's very blurred, you can't check. It's not something you can do, it's not something as clear-cut as, for example, the Vampire Clan there. Because you look at Nosferatu, you know he's a Nosferatu. Even with vampires, it's difficult to tell, but this is more difficult because you can't check up sires and that kind of thing, so it can be far more difficult to figure out what they are. Plus, they don't all use the term Avenger, they use different terms. It's just a term they use in the book. They actually say all these types of things. And there's Hermits. Hermits, they get messages from the messenger to heralds a lot more than other hunters, because other hunters get them at different times. They get them a lot. They really get them a lot. So much so that that's why they picked up the name Hermits. But they just have to remove themselves from humanity. They have to remove themselves from other hunters. They can't coordinate with people. They will try and live by themselves. However, they still get some messages when they're doing this. It's not as bad. And they will try and forward them on to other hunters. They will try and provide this information. So you could have a good use for an NPC there. Or a PC, because you're not going to have as much disruption as you would with a Wayward in the group. Unless your group is decided to literally go. Like if you start a game, the players might start going gung-ho and somehow surviving, going into stuff, and some of the players wants to bring in a Wayward, you know, they might fit into that group because they're Wayward who do fit into groups. It's just the average group isn't going to be trying to kill everything and have absolutely no compassion whatsoever. And lastly, there's bystanders. Bystanders are basically people who, when the time of the imbuing came, when they were imbued, or when they were going to be imbued, when they saw humanity, they hesitated. The moment passed. They were changed, but not as much as a hunter. They don't have a creed. They don't have any of these parts. They have some resistances. They can spend like some of their merits on getting more resistance and stuff. So, but they know about supernatural things. That's the important thing. They know about supernatural things. So it can still be useful. It's not as powerful as somebody who's of a creed, but it's an option. It's actually still a workable option from a great storytelling point of view. Because if you had that thing where you saw somebody who's going to be hurt, and you saw this supernatural thing, and in the moment you hesitated, you were afraid, you didn't go forward and you didn't attack, and that person got killed, and no one has passed. You're not being made you weren't turned into an imbued, you weren't turned into a hunter, but you could be guilt racked about that. It could be a fantastic story. You could have a fantastic character there. Anyway, I could probably keep going on about this for hours. I think this is the longest video I've done. There's still more bits and pieces, but like I said, if this sounds like a game that's interesting to you, consider it. It could be very good purchase for you. However, do look up Winterson's Hunter the Vigil video. He does videos. He goes into a lot of depth, and they're similar games but coming from different angles, and see which one appeals to you and your players. Because you might think, oh, Hunter the Reckoning's great, and your player's like, I'm not interested in that. I know a lot of people aren't interested in Hunter the Reckoning. Hunter Division wouldn't appeal as much to me, but it still sounds like a pretty cool game. So I'll leave it there because I'm literally going to run out of tape in a few seconds. I'll see you again. Goodbye.